All right, so welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to have my full Dune review with my special guest dressed up as a Fremen with her still suit is my daughter Abby. Say hi.
Hi.
Say it louder.
Hi.
I wanted to bring Abby into this video not just because she's cool, but because I have read the books. I've been a fan of Dune for 30 some odd years. She has not read the books and has only been a fan of Dune for 2 years. And so you're going to get differing perspectives here on what on the movie review. And so we'll talk in sort of general terms with a review. Then we'll have a little bit of a spoilery section, and we'll sort of wrap it up. I'll talk a little bit about the science, but there wasn't too much science that I haven't covered in my previous Dune videos. So overall, Abby, what did you think?
I thought it was really, really good. The filmmaking was really good. The soundtrack was really good. I think I liked the first movie more.
Really? So I thought it was extremely well made. The cinematography was gorgeous, which you would expect from Denis Villeneuve. I also thought Hans Zimmer's score was great, and I actually liked his score better this time around because one of my complaints about the first movie was the score was sort of ubiquitous and a bit overwhelming. There were scenes that I think would have played out better if they'd been without music, whereas this time he was content to let some scenes play out without music, and I think that built the tension. Like the preview that they showed was of Paul riding the sandworm, and it's silent for most of it, and then once he gets up on the worm, then the music swells triumphantly, and you get those big loud sounds. And I thought he did a even better job with part two than he did with part one. And the scale of it is epic, but it still focuses on the characters. You know, Stilgar's character, Chani's character arc, Jessica's character arc, Paul's character arc especially. You know, I didn't know if Chalamet would be up to the second part, but I thought he did a credible job. I mean, people have focused on the two leads naturally of Chalamet and Zendaya, but I thought actually the supporting cast, Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, Rebecca Ferguson, especially Javier Bardem, Austin Butler as, introduced in this one as Fade Ruatha, they were all really good. I mean, what did you have a favorite performance for this one?
No, I think they're all good. I liked Chalamet's performance in the second one, though. I think he brought more character to Paul.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit bland in a little bit blander. Not really he's bad in the first one, but a little bit blander in the first one, and he brings much more depth to the character this time. Especially because, as in the novels, Paul is sort of tormented about his destiny and where he's taking the galaxy and so forth. I did like the ending of the movie because it's a complete movie. Part one and part two tell a complete story, but it leaves enough threads dangling that if they decide to do chapter three, which Villeneuve has indicated he wants to do, then it's set up for that. Well, I won't spoil it, but you have various character arcs that are left kind of unfinished. You have the beginning of a new era in galactic history. And so you're set up, if you want to do Messiah, they're really set up for it. And I hope they do. I think that they would do a credible job. So people have been comparing it. Christopher Nolan said it was more like The Empire Strikes Back than The Two Towers when you're talking about these big epics. I think that's a very good comparison because The Empire Strikes Back also tells a complete story but leaves the threads dangling that they then picked up in Return of the Jedi to complete the saga.
I imagined the scene where Paul confronts the Emperor, I imagined that to be more intense. It was very, not intense, and it was very quiet, and I wasn't anticipating that.
Yeah, it does have a tendency to let some things play out quietly. So just to now we'll get into spoiler territory for those of you who do not want spoilers or want to watch the movie first and come back to this. That's what we'll be doing. So I think in terms of comparison to the book, look, I'm not a book fundamentalist. I don't think that the movies necessarily have to reflect 100% of what's in the book. I think of movies as telling the same story just differently. Like the Arthur legend. You had the Arthur legend was told for centuries. We finally got a canonical version in Mallory's book, but it's been adapted and changed over the centuries. It's all telling the same story. As long as you're true to the story and the characters, then I don't mind changes. Most of the movie is consistent with what we see in the book, in the major plot threads. The one big change is Chani's arc. That in the book, Chani is a believer. She follows Paul. She goes along with him. She accepts that he has to marry Irulan for political purposes and that she's going to be his concubine and so forth. And she and Jessica sort of have this moment between them. Jessica never married Paul's father, so he could be available for a potential political marriage. That's the biggest difference that I would say in the character arcs. But I think it actually works pretty well that you have more of a tension between the Fremen who believe in Paul and the Fremen who don't believe in this prophecy, and Chani being sort of the skeptic that isn't, even when she sees these things happening, even when she sees prophecies fulfilled, can't bring herself to believe in it. So if they do make that third movie, there are plot developments in that third movie that will require Chani to be around. And so I'm wondering how they will go about bringing her about. There were a few little nuances that I noticed that aren't explicitly mentioned, but if you're familiar with the books, are mentioned. For example, Paul uses atomic weapons in the final battle. But one of the subtleties in the book is that they're not supposed to be used against people. That's because of the convention. And so he wriggles out of that through a loophole by using them against the shield wall surrounding Arrakeen, not against people. And so that allows him that little wriggle room. So it's not specifically said, but now that I mention it, does that sound to you?
I think it makes it better.
Yeah.
Knowing that nuance.
Yeah. And there are a lot of little just touches of that if you've read the books, what the difference between what I've called good fan service and bad fan service. Bad fan service is where if you haven't read the book or whatever, you won't understand what's going on. Good fan service is where it's a little nod to the fans who know every minutia, but will not distract people who aren't fans. And so I think that's a good example of a fan service, that you didn't know about this rule with the atomics, that you can't use them against people. But now that you know it, it makes it just that little bit of extra better. And so I did like, they do a large sequence on Giedi Prime, which is very bleak. It's probably the bleakest Giedi Prime we've seen in the 3 adaptations, that it's basically a black and white movie at that point. Mm-hmm. Irulan, in the book and in the 1984 version, she's barely there. She's mostly seen in the book, at least until book 3, as a historian, that you see these quotes from the history book she's written. And some of those show up in the adaptation. Whereas in the TV series and in this one, she takes a more active role in what's going on. You had to ask me at some point, wait, is she a Bene Gesserit? That it took you a little bit of while to pick up. And I kind of like that they sort of tease that out and then bring it home that she's a Bene Gesserit. The motive of the Emperor is twisted a little bit. In the movie, one of the reasons he destroyed House Atreides was because the Bene Gesserit thought that they were getting too independent and might create a Kwisatz Haderach they couldn't control, which is eventually what happened. And in the book, it's more that Leto was so popular with the great houses that he made the Emperor jealous. As they say in the TV series adaptation, never get more popular than the boss. And the final resolution is that in both the novel and the movie, Paul has the power to destroy the spice. But in the TV series and the book, that's what gives him the upper hand, because the guild refuses to deliver armies to the surface of Arrakis because of the fear that it may be destroyed. Whereas that doesn't come across in the novel, that they are sort of more beginning the jihad. But these are pretty small changes, the touches they gave to it. I mean, this is clearly on the behalf of everyone involved, a labor of love, that they put a lot of world building and so forth into this. Was there anything as someone who hadn't read the book that confused you or baffled you?
They never explained why it's bad that Jessica was pregnant when she took the water of life. I had to look that up later.
Yeah, I think that will become clear if they do make the third movie. Mm-hmm. That for those of you who either don't care about the spoilers, what it does is it wakens her fetus to full adult consciousness, and she becomes what they call the abomination. This child who, when she's very young, has this full consciousness and connection to past memory, and is very dangerous, and eventually it costs her a lot mentally down the road. They did this in the Children of Dune sequel to the sci-fi series and emphasized that. In the novel and in the previous two adaptations, Alia is born before the end of the novel. They compressed the timeline a little bit, so that might have been clearer. But they do have this psychic communication between her and her fetus, which sort of emphasizes that. But I think if the sequel gets made, that will explore it in more depth. So last thing is, so we'll end spoilers there. The one thing I would say, you want to see this in the theater, on the biggest screen you can, because this movie is absolutely gorgeous, and there's so much detail. And one of the things I noticed in the arena scenes on Gidi Prime was just how the crowd was just like enveloping, and this massive stadium with all these people in there, and it's just so many scenes are just like paintings almost. It's just gorgeous. What was your favorite visual, you would say, from the movie?
I don't know. I would have an answer for Dune Part One, was when Paul interacted with the spice for the first time. I think that was like kind of the first scene that I saw that I thought was just like very telling of how Denis Villeneuve does his movies in that
Well, my favorite scene in the first one was when they're rescuing the guys from the sandcrawler, and the worm comes and they pull him aboard the helicopter, and it shows the worm devouring the sandcrawler and the ornithopter flying around, and Lee Kane's reciting the liturgy of Shai Hulud, bless the maker and his water, with the music. I think that's probably my favorite scene in the movie. I don't know. I'd have to see this a couple of times before I decide on what my favorite scene is. But one of the most gorgeous scenes to me is after Paul goes to the south, and they have this huge underground cavern with these shafts of light coming in with thousands and thousands of Fremen. And just the crowd scenes alone in this movie are just stunning. And if either they hired a million extras or CG has come a long way to make those crowds really look convincing. So I definitely recommend seeing this as soon as possible on the biggest screen possible. And if you're like us, you'll probably want to see it again. I think we should see it again at some point, because there's just so much to take in. And for a 2 hour and 45-minute movie, I don't think it really felt that long. I mean, there's a lot that happens, but it moves at a good pace so that you're not sitting there, checking your watch and wondering when it's going to end. So I think this will probably end up being one of the best movies of the year, all told. I mean, the critics are already saying that. There's still 9 months to go before we get there, but this was actually fantastic. So as far as any science goes, I do still like that they made this emphasizes the ecology of Arrakis. That this is not just a desert planet, but a complex planet where the northern areas are more inhabitable, and they think the southern areas are uninhabitable because they're harsher, but there's more to it than that. I loved the scene where it shows the potential future terraforming that they want to do for this planet and their vision of what they can change Arrakis to be. Terraforming is going to be something maybe centuries from now that we're interested in. And so this is one of the first novels to really deal with that idea of changing an ecology on that kind of scale. And it shows a little bit of what would be required, the commitment that would be required, and the time scale of centuries or millennia that would be required to do that. And so, this is something that I talked about with the first book. The second chapter doesn't add much to that, but we'll see where the third chapter goes with this, and if they do further chapters. So overall, positive thumbs up from a book reader and from a not book reader. I'll be back again in a couple weeks with something else. Until then, I'm Mike Siegel. I write for Ordinary Times. This is Abby. She does not, but she's cool anyway. So thank you for watching.